Enoch is the root to all of these different references, whether people call it the Golden Fleece or the Pearls of Wisdom or the Archives of the Masons or the Golden Apples or the Grail Quest or the information of the Ark of the Covenant. They're all allegories that go back to what happened before the flood and with Enoch. Well, I think one of the first things that I always find interesting is people often overlook that there were two Enochs. And so if we're going to look at Enochian literature and the impact that Enoch had on prehistory and beyond the flood and even to our time, we need to understand that there were two Enochs, because one has to realize that there were two different scriptures and two different references to what was going on, and we have to keep straight who the two Enochs were. So let's just talk about Enoch that most people are familiar with, and he was seventh from the lineage of Adam down through the lineage of Seth, and so he was born after Jared, and Jared was the sixth generation when the Nephilim came into being. It was that generation, and that time frame is very important. Then came Enoch, then came Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. Conversely, on the Cain branch, Cain, son of Adam, bore his first son, and his name was Enoch. And so he's born earlier than Enoch and was around much before Enoch was. And Enoch received all the information and the knowledge that Cain would have received from Adam. And when we look at what happened in Eden according to Gnostic recollections and or Freemasonry recollections and Masonry, antediluvian Masonry as they like to call it, they have many, many legends about this, and Adam received education, information, knowledge from heaven, and he passed it on to his two sons. Not Cain, or not Abel, because Abel obviously was slain by Cain, but on to Seth and on to Cain. So both had this source of information that apparently came out of Eden. Now, biblically, we're not told that, but we are told that, Adam spent a lot of time in Eden, and it certainly is possible that he received great knowledge from God while in heaven, and that he was a practitioner of the information that he would have received. Or it's possible that Cain received this information from the dark angels. Certainly, biblically, that's not clear. But what is clear from the other testimonies, and particularly from the Gnostic religions and from the Masonic organizations and secret societies, is Cain received what they call the 7 sacred sciences, as did Seth. Now, Seth practiced mostly astronomy because his descendants were agrarians. And Cain and the people that he likely married into were mostly nomads and hunters and gatherers until Cain came along and reorganized them. But they used these sciences that they got in heaven, and they were called the 7 sacred sciences, and they included things like music and arithmetic and geometry and all the different sciences, astronomy. So there was 7 in total. There was rhetoric involved. There was the ability to write. And I list all of those 7 sciences. And even though they sound mundane, and they were revolutionary at that time for civilizing humankind, and it's the level of knowledge that they took this knowledge to. And so Cain indoctrinated Enoch in all of this knowledge. And at this time, additional information was provided to the descendants of Cain, and Enoch in particular, additional illicit knowledge that came from heaven from the dark angels. And so we have 2 different levels of information coming to Enoch. Now, what Enoch does is he starts to develop how to organize this information and how to utilize them and how to pervert them. And from there, he organizes it into secret societies with initiation, and he also formulates a religion that honors the fallen angels and no longer honors God. And they start to pervert all of this knowledge in ways that probably were not what God wanted them to do, but we can see such knowledge being manifested towards the end of the generations before the flood, because they built all of these great monuments, things like the pyramids. And when we look at mythologies from around the world, we see a civilization, and let's say several civilizations from their perspective, because they looked at more than just the Sumerian civilization, but civilizations that were all over the world. And there was either 3 or 4, depending on which one you look at as major civilizations or empires. And they developed civilizations that had significant technology, significant information, significant advancements in the ability to build, and they did it all to honor the great architect of the universe, as they like to call him, which of course was Lucifer. Yeah, so Enoch from the Cain line became very, very famous for the development of all knowledge, including inventing writing, which probably were hieroglyphs, as the Masons like to call it, and that the writings that Enoch invented, and other people believe it was the cuneiform. And he did this to be able to record all of this information so that it wouldn't be lost. And so he became fused with a number of people through history and prehistory because of this knowledge. And in some accounts, they have Enoch actually evolving into a god because of the knowledge. And he was the intermediary between the gods, or the fallen angels, and the kings. And so over time, Enoch is called different names in different civilizations. And so we see Enoch's name come up in all of the ancient civilizations. People just know him differently. And one of those names was Hermes. Another one would be Mercury. Thout was another one. The Quran would refer to Enoch as Idris, but when the Quran refers to Idris, they're actually referring to Enoch of the Seth line. And so Enoch preserves all of this information, and he stores it in 9 vaults, and there's some descendants of Enoch that come along, the sons of Lamech, and again, there's 2 Lamechs, one from the Seth line, one from the Cain line. And the sons of Lamech, they also have a renaissance of these sciences, but they're preserving this knowledge to cross over the deluge that they know is coming. They can't prevent it, but they don't want to lose their history, and they don't want to lose their knowledge, and they somehow want to transport this information across the flood. And so the information is stored in 9 vaults, and some people believe those are stored below the pyramids. And they also create 2 pillars that itemize what the 7 sacred sciences are and the location of the hidden or lost knowledge. Right. And so when it crosses the flood, there's another character that comes along by the name of Hermes. But before I touch on Hermes, there's a god of wisdom in Egypt that, if you look at the mythologies and the religions of ancient Egypt, his name was Thoth, and he has a parallel description in terms of what he did, what his role was, and he also became godlike because of the knowledge. And so he's known as Thoth in Egypt as well as Hermes, and I'll get into how that sort of comes together in a minute or so. But understand that in prehistory that there were 7 angels that divided up the earth. And they're the 7 angels that were also involved on the creation of the Nephilim, and they essentially set up different cult centers around the world. And so this religion that Enoch had developed and this knowledge went to all of these empires, particularly after the Nephilim had taken over and as kings, and they partnered together. And so when we look at prehistory on the legends, Enoch gets merged with Thoth. I actually think Thoth is just another name for one of these 7 angels that started these snake societies and brought this religion and knowledge along in the different civilizations that had belonged to them. But that's the first merging. And then when you cross the flood, you have Hermes of Egypt and Hermes of Greece, who the Greeks also call their Greek Hermes Mercury, so that there is a separation in terms of how they understood Hermes as to the Egyptian Hermes. But when we look at where Hermes came from, he's not in the Bible. And so his name is very, very difficult to track, except that if we get into Masonic legends, we understand that Hermes partnered with Nimrod at Babel. And it was Hermes who found these 2 pillars that I was talking about before. And so now he becomes, along with Nimrod, the 2 co-conspirators to have a renaissance of this antediluvian knowledge at Babel, which was manifested in the tower. And we understand the power of this information that they had just gotten their hands on and started to redevelop in the post-diluvian world. When we look at the Babel account, and paraphrasing what it says in Genesis about Babel is that with one language and working as one people, there's nothing that they will not be capable of doing. And this goes to this knowledge that I was talking about. So Hermes, after Babel, he moves off to Egypt with Mizraim and with Ham to start the Egyptian civilization again. And Nimrod stays in Chaldea and continues to develop as best he can with the different languages and all the different things that they have to deal with, the development of this knowledge and this religion again. And people will know the Chaldeans as the Babylonians and the wise men who produced the Magi. I think everybody's really familiar with that, but they don't really know exactly how they got that information. Well, it first resurfaced again at Babel. And so Hermes, once he moves over with Ham and Mizraim to Egypt, they start all of this development of the religion and the mysteries again in Egypt, and that's where Hermes starts to get fused with Enoch. And then there's a third Hermes that comes along quite a bit later, who was the father of alchemy, which is one of the offshoots of the knowledge of these 7 sciences. And understand that, because I don't think I underlined it well enough earlier, is that the power of this knowledge that was developed and what they were trying to develop, again, had to be housed in secret societies for the elite, because they felt that knowledge was so powerful that it could destroy the world. And they certainly didn't want this information in the hands of the mundane mortals or the descendants of Noah or the descendants of Seth. So they wanted to keep it separated from them, along with their belief in reincarnation and the process that goes along with that. And so in the post-diluvian world, Hermes is so bound to Enoch in the history that they sort of come together as one figure. And then with the third one, you get the 3 Hermes, or the Termescus Hermes, that people might be familiar with in the occult world. And so it's just, to me, it's a fusing of these 3 characters all into one to try and make sense of all of this history and all of this knowledge that was originally developed in prehistory and crossed the flood. And so they came up with that title as sort of the cosmology of all of this. Yeah, and I think a couple things on that aspect is certainly the Antichrist will be absolutely illuminated, and I don't use that term lightly, because it's a specific term for the adepts, and he'll be a super adept, and he'll be of genius level, and he will be totally familiar with all of this information and knowledge. And we'll see more of this knowledge coming out as we get closer to the end times, and I think we'll see significant displays of it in the end times, so that it deludes the people into believing that the Antichrist is the Messiah, and they will lead the rebellion, and they will lead humankind to freedom. So that definitely is all connected. And if we look at science today, all of our sciences come out of this. And so when we talk about the 7 sacred sciences, those are also known as the 7 liberal arts. And it's the pillar of our scientific knowledge today. There's an organization that was organized in the 1600s called Freemasonry, and amongst the Freemasons were the Rosicrucians, who were forming Freemasonry, and at the same time, these people partnered to start a society called the Royal Society. And the Royal Society is also called the Invisible College, and if there's people who are familiar with the Invisible College term, then they'll be a little bit more familiar with the mystic side of what I'm talking about, because again, that has a very specific reference in Rosicrucianism as to what the Invisible College is. But this is the start of modern science, and it was created to not only develop the sciences, but to pay honor to the great architect of the universe, and who, of course, is Lucifer. And all of these terms are connected because it's part of their belief system. What's important about this is all of the education and all of the scientific communities pay homage to the Royal Society to this day. So they're inundated with their religion and their belief system. So one wonders why Christianity and Christian beliefs don't get a hearing and aren't considered in anything other, as long as it's not got anything to do with the Bible, is considered. This is why. And so this knowledge that they're developing and what we're looking at the CERN, whatever they're doing there, and there's a lot of speculation there, but they're playing with technology and science that is amazing on the surface level, but very, very dangerous. This is in pursuit of their Luciferian agenda. There is no doubt about it, because science is a slave to the Royal College, to these ancient organizations, to the 7 sacred sciences, to this whole conspiracy that's been going on since prehistory. And I think what people sort of need to realize about this is that we can see a lot of the homage still being paid in education today or in different particular sciences, so that they have to wear rings and they have to do initiations when they're in college. And we look at, let's say, the medical society, for example. Just look at any of those symbols that they're using, and I'll use the medical societies, whether it's doctors or it's institutions, they use this snake wrapped around a stick motif. And that's their Hermes motif. And you're going to see a dual snake motif and a single snake motif, and some of them will have Hermes sandals on the bottom. Every organization in the medical field will have a variation of it. And I'll even take that back where it goes back to Greek mythology and how that was developed. But both of those lead directly back to the snake societies of old and the knowledge that they possessed, and certainly medical knowledge has been always a big part of these sciences and knowledge. People are probably familiar with the great white brotherhood of the Illuminati today. And so this term goes back in time to 2 locations, Hermopolis, and also it was also in Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and it also goes back to Babel. And so Nimrod created the constitution at Babel in the first great white brotherhood of Masonry at the time of Babel. And then it moved to Egypt, to Hermopolis, where it thrived in parallel to the Chaldean version. And later on, the Constitution and the sciences and the organization was renaissanced once more, and sort of reinvigorated this great white brotherhood society. And what's important about this as well is this is the linkage that a religion and a people that people are familiar with from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essenes. They are a polytheist sect of Judaism, very much related with Kabbalism. And they believe they received all of their information and their beliefs and their religion and their knowledge back to the Great White Brotherhood. And of course, the Essenes would wear white robes as the people of the Great White Brotherhood did back in the day. And if people are looking for a good example of who the Essenes were, these were the people in the temple that Ezekiel referred to who would turn their back to the temple in the mornings and pray in the direction of the rising sun. Because you have to remember that the mystical religion that Enoch developed was a sun worshiping religion. And so the sun is a significant part of this whole worship. And again, you look at sun worship all around the world in all of polytheist cultures. This is not a coincidence. This is just taking it back to the root. Yes, the lower level initiatives will be deceived in this manner, and it's done for two reasons. One is so that they're not scared, scared away from the organization. They'll be initiated into Luciferian doctrine at the 33rd degree or the third level of perfection, depending on which organization of Masonry you're talking about, because there's two. There's the Scottish Rite, and then there's also the York Rite. So, but at that level of perfection, they'll learn who the true God is that they worship. But the lower levels will think and believe that this is Enoch from the Seth line. The second reason that they did it was you have to look at Catholicism and the Roman Church. They were very, very aggressive against any belief system or religion or organization that ran contrary to the Christian religion. And so they, over time in the last 2,000 years, they meshed these two Enochs together to put on this sort of cloak of being righteous, as opposed to who the true Enoch is that they recognize. And they recognize Enoch as their true patriarch. And Tubal-Cain is yet another one of those patriarchs that they look to in a very, very high regard, just as they look at Lamech, son of Cain, as a key player and a patriarch, and in particular, a few other of Lamech's progeny. I already mentioned Tubal-Cain, but certainly Nama, Jubal, and Jabal. Those are the key ones that they certainly recognize from the seven sacred sciences and developing in prehistory. But Tubal-Cain, for the most part, and Enoch and Cain are the most important figures in Masonry as far as their prehistory records go. Yeah, so Solomon is in the other belief system is considered one of the great magi's, one of the great wizards, one of the great sorcerers of all time, and also one of the grand superintendents of Masonry as well. And that's more of a usurping of biblical stories and all of the sort of allegorical things that went along with Solomon's reign. But certainly Hiram Abeth was a real figure, and he received this building knowledge down through building organizations, which is again another arm of the 6,000-year conspiracy of the knowledge on how to build these great temples and things. And so his knowledge through the Cretan builders, where they received their information from, was utilized and helped building the temple. And all of this is designed just to delegitimize Christianity and to, again, give them that sort of level of pedigree and level of authority. But really, in terms of going right to the pillar of their belief system, it's just another allegory of several things that are coming together in the pillars, but they're quite prominent in Freemasonry, but I don't think that it goes to the core of their beliefs. It's just another allegory.
just something to kind of confuse the members below 33rd degree.
Yeah, it's just again, and the illuminated will have a different take on the meaning of that than what they teach the lower level. So there's two meanings to all of the allegories that they teach the lower levels. There's the one to those who aren't ready yet to learn the true message, and then that's what the true message is. And that's you have to understand that part of this whole society that was built by Enoch and Nimrod and the Great White Brotherhood of Egypt is that these organizations have circles within circles. So the Illuminati is at the small little circle of Freemasonry. And only those who are illuminated at the 33rd degree level know all of the information and what the true information is. Yeah, so let's just go over each of these just quickly. And so the first one is of the seven liberal sciences is grammar, and that was to teach humankind to both speak and write. The second one, it was rhetoric, and that was to teach humankind to speak in subtle terms. The third one is dialectic, to teach humankind to discern between truth and falsehoods. Arithmetic, to teach humankind to compute all manners of numbers. Geometry, to teach humankind to measure the earth and all things and to build things. Music, which is also numbers based in when you really get down to it. And Pythagoras was a big proponent of his musical and numerology philosophy. So music was another one, and astronomy was to teach humankind about the planets and the stars, and out of astronomy came astrology, which was a noted perversion of prehistory that survived, and also an invention of Enoch. And just so that people understand a little bit more about rhetoric, in its original state, it was the art of persuasion, and grammar was more or less molding and educating men and teaching them to read. So you can see how powerful these things are just from civilizing humans, but how far they could actually take it. And when you look at some of the mythologies around prehistory at what they were able to do, and in some of the mythologies, flying machines and very powerful weapons and incredible monuments that they built, that they really did develop these things to a great level. So those are the original seven sacred sciences. It does, and more, because they brought in things like, abortion and sacrifices and the art of war, and of course Tubal-Cain, which is one of the famous people from Masonic prehistory. He was very much a military man, and some believe he was actually a giant, which I suppose is possible, but it would not be through the the Genesis 6 giants, because Tubal-Cain was son of Lamech. So unless Lamech married a female giant, that probably wouldn't be the case. But legend has it that he was a giant. Absolutely, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want people to understand that Tubal-Cain, Nama, Jubal, and Jabal, when you look at Masonic writings, these and other mythologies, these people have great infamy. And in the legends of the craft from Freemasonry, I mean, Tubal was a smith, an artificer of the highest level, creating tools and weapons, a master craftsman, military leader, and from the Bible, it just sort of hints at that, that Tubal-Cain had forged tools from bronze and iron. And also in the book, I'll make some surprising references. At least for me, I thought it was surprising that iron actually went back into prehistory. And I'll spend a little bit of time on that, because most people think iron didn't come along until about 1400 BC. At least that's the standard thing that's taught in in education. Nama was basically known as creating a craft called weaving, but Nama has more importance than this. She was thought to have married Samael, the fallen angel, and produced giants through that marriage. Nama is also believed in the Gnostic religion to be a derivative of Noria, and Noria has a few different names, probably about 5 or 6 different names. And she was married to an interesting fellow named Deucalion. And so Deucalion and Noria / Nama were the two that survived the flood in the Greek mythology. And so Deucalion was the son of Prometheus. So whether or not Prometheus was a Nephilim or a fallen angel, it doesn't matter because this is still another story of mythology of giants surviving the flood on an ark, which I think is rather interesting. And in the Sumerian mythology, Nama is traced back with a few different names, but understand her as a dragon queen of the original ring lords in Sumeria. So she has a very, very infamous legacy that goes out through prehistory, as did Enoch. Jubal was also noted in the Legends of the Craft as inventing music, and Jabal, who is noted for living in tents and ranching and farming in the Bible, in his account, was known for developing masonry. So these were the 4 that really took the renaissance of the 7 sacred sciences to the new level in the generation immediately following the entrance of the Nephilim. And they would have partnered with the Nephilim, and it would have become the statewide religion of prehistory. And we see that again in so much entertainment and so much mythology, that when you see kingships, you have these Merlin-type wizards, or the wizards that you see in the Lord of the Rings, or if you look at the priests of Egypt. And this is that partnership that happened. So you had not only the religion and the kings, but you had this knowledge, and it was all centered, and it was all controlled through these secret snake societies. The lineage of Adam down through the lineage of Seth. And so he was born after Jared, and Jared was the 6th generation when the Nephilim came into being. It was that generation, and that time frame is very important. Then came Enoch, then came Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. Conversely, on the Cain branch, Cain, son of Adam, bore his first son, and his name was Enoch. And so he's born earlier than Enoch and was around much before Enoch was. And Enoch received all the information and the knowledge that Cain would have received from Adam. And when we look at what happened in Eden according to Gnostic recollections and or Freemasonry recollections and Masonry, antediluvian Masonry as they like to call it, they have many, many legends about this. And Adam received education, information. Enoch is the root to all of these different references, whether people call it the Golden Fleece or the Pearls of Wisdom or the archives of the Masons or the Golden Apples or the Grail quest or the information of the Ark of the Covenant. They're all allegories that go back to what happened before the flood and with Enoch. Well, I think one of the first things that I always find interesting is people often overlook that there were 2 Enochs. And so if we're going to look at Enochian literature and the impact that Enoch had on prehistory and beyond the flood and even to our time, we need to understand that there were 2 Enochs, because one has to realize that there were 2 different scriptures and 2 different references to what was going on, and we have to keep straight who the 2 Enochs were. So let's just talk about Enoch that most people are familiar with. And he was seventh from the married into were mostly nomads and hunters and gatherers until Cain came along and reorganized them. But they used these sciences that they got in heaven, and they were called the seven sacred sciences, and they included things like music and arithmetic and geometry and all the different sciences, astronomy. So there was seven in total. There was rhetoric involved. There was the ability to write. And I list all of those seven sciences. And even though they sound mundane, and they were revolutionary at that time for civilizing humankind, and it's the level of knowledge that they took this knowledge to. And so Cain indoctrinated Enoch in all of this knowledge. And at this time, additional information was provided to the descendants of Cain and Enoch in particular, additional illicit knowledge that came from heaven from the dark angels. And so we have two different levels of information coming to Enoch. Now what Enoch does is information, knowledge from heaven, and he passed it on to his two sons. Not Cain, or not Abel, because Abel obviously was slain by Cain, but on to Seth and on to Cain. So both had this source of information that apparently came out of Eden. Now biblically, we're not told that, but we are told that, Adam spent a lot of time in Eden, and it certainly is possible that he received great knowledge from God while in heaven, and that he was a practitioner of the information that he would have received. Or it's possible that Cain received this information from the dark angels. Certainly, biblically, that's not clear. But what is clear from the other testimonies, and particularly from the Gnostic religions and from the Masonic organizations and secret societies, is Cain received what they call the seven sacred sciences, as did Seth. Now, Seth practiced mostly astronomy because his descendants were agrarians. And Cain and the people that he starts to develop how to organize this information and how to utilize them and how to pervert them. And from there, he organizes it into secret societies with initiation, and he also formulates a religion that honors the fallen angels and no longer honors God. And they start to pervert all of this knowledge in ways that probably were not what God wanted them to do, but we can see such knowledge being manifested towards the end of the generations before the flood, because they built all of these great monuments, things like the pyramids. And when we look at mythologies from around the world, we see a civilization, and let's say several civilizations from their perspective, because they looked at more than just the Sumerian civilization, but civilizations that were all over the world, and there was either three or four, depending on which one you look at as